Welcome to Kruk and Kuip Extra Innings, as today is the season finale of the Giants and the Padres, and this 162nd game of the season, and the season is mercifully over for the Giants, and they win it 5-4 to ruin their chances at the first pick of the next year's draft. You can follow me at Rob Iman at twitter.com. And sorry I wasn't on yesterday. I got busy, so I ended up having to take care of other business. And at this point, now it's on to the postseason. Yesterday, Matt Cain pitched his final game as a Giant, and he pitched admirably yesterday. He was five innings, no earned runs, just didn't get any fucking run support, but what a good way to leave the Giants yesterday, and I wish him a happy retirement. Unfortunately, the bullpen blew the game yesterday for him. And then now he's going to retire. We'll see if his number gets retired or not. He's certainly definitely going to be – he might be a Hall of Famer. He was definitely a workhorse for the Giants, and I hope he comes back as a coach or in a front office role for the Giants next year as the Giants get ready for some significant changes here in the offseason. But I remember when he came on in 2005, and you know, it was really admirable of him just to retire after this year instead of trying to showcase for another team next year and hope to have, or even try as a bullpen reliever. It's just now him and Lincecum are gone. The only one left from the World Series on that pitching rotation, and then Vogelsong's retired now. The only pitcher left from the three World Series is actually Madison Bumgarner in the starting rotation, surprisingly. And even the bullpen, a lot of the pitchers in the bullpen are not part of the – we have a handful from the 14 championship. I think Osich might be one, possibly, and Hunter Strickland. The rest are people we've traded for, came from the minors, so that's crazy. It's the pitching's looking a whole lot different, and next year is going to be an interesting year for that. And the only other are the rest of the players are Hunter Pence, who's going to be on his last year next year. Let's get to the game first, and then we'll get. But yeah, I'm not going to go on hiatus yet either. I'm going to be on air next week doing playoff picks and stuff, and start making picks for the postseason. So I'm not completely going to go on hiatus yet, and then I'll be back on Sundays during the NFL season for the Niners. So there's opportunities. I'll be here until December, then I'll probably go into hiatus in January for a couple months before spring training. But it was a good game by the Giants today. They won 5-4. I also make some picks for the But if anybody's actually watching out there, if you want to come on air, I'll definitely let you send a link or something to get you on air. Since it is the season finale today, I wouldn't mind having other people on air today or whatnot. If you feel like you've got to say something about the Giants next season or so, or priorities they need to make during the off season. But today, Buster Posey went one at bat and then had his curtain call today. He finishes with a .320 batting average, not too bad. Denard Span 1 for 3. Brandon Crawford 2 for 4, finishes .253. Not a bad way to finish the season after having such a bad few months. So hopefully this is something Brandon Crawford can work on. Pablo's going to finish with a .225 batting average with the Giants. And I wouldn't mind, I don't know, I don't think Pablo should come back necessarily. I'm not, but if he does, maybe in a backup role or something, or coming off the bench, I wouldn't mind seeing him in the bench role next year, but not as a full-time starter next year. I certainly think there's one option at third they should take a look at, and that's Todd Frazier. I don't know how cheap he's going to be, but he's not going to be too expensive, and he's not going to hit for average, but he has some pop, and I think he could certainly give the Giants a power bat they much desperately need at a low price with the Giants' payroll situation next year. So not too bad, not about that, and then other parts of the game. Cueto went 4 earned runs, 5 innings pitched. Bullpen was good. Ty Block gave 2 scoreless innings. I certainly think Ty Block is going to be that other lefty coming out of the bullpen next year. He looks better out of the bullpen than he does as a starter. And I think we're almost going to be pretty set in the rotation next year. But I think we at least have 2 lefties in the pen next year. I don't think Okurt's going to come back next year. I don't think Osich is coming back next year. They've both have burned their bridges here. It's just not worked out for those 2. And Hunter Strickland, Hunter Strickland got the win today, and I think he's going to be in the 7th inning role next year. I certainly think next year your 7th, 8th inning, you're going to probably see Hunter Strickland in the 7th. You'll see Sam Dyson in the 8th, and then Mark Melancon in the 9th. I think that's how it's going to work next year. Hopefully Melancon has a much better year than what he had this last year, certainly. And the outfield, there's going to be a lot of questions there as Hunter Pence is getting into the last year of his contract, and this is likely going to be his last year as a Giant. I don't see him coming back after this year. You got Denard Span, who's on his last year, and yeah, Denard Span is a defensive liability, but I think he'd be good in left field next year. Maybe put him in left and get somebody else in free agency to play center, or Austin Slater. I think Slater could be somebody to consider for center next year, or Jarrett Parker. I certainly think the outfield, they don't necessarily need to go spend big money on somebody. I think the pieces are there in the outfield. They just need to get the right hitting coach, and I think as much as I think it's time to part ways with Hensley Mullins and bring in somebody from the outside to be the next hitting coach for the Giants. I'm almost certain that there's somebody in-house who's going to be able to take over some of these roles. I think even Mac Williamson, even though he hasn't been able to hit for average yet, I think Williamson might have something to show. We shall see, but I think Mac will. And then, of course, I think Gorkas Hernandez is going to be back next year, .255 batting average. He's definitely a good 4th outfielder. I certainly think he could. Jarrett Parker, .247 this year. And he's a bit inconsistent. That's a real downside with Mac Williamson, but I certainly think that, or Jarrett Parker, he's a bit inconsistent, but I think if you get the right hitting coach in there, I think if he can hit for average next year, you will not just see his batting average maybe go up by 20, 30 points, but I certainly think that maybe the home runs can go up. He can certainly hit for power, as I've seen. The power's there. I just don't. It's just the plate discipline's not there for Parker or Williamson or even Slater. And I certainly think they can get their opportunities next year. And then I think Denard will probably go to left field. Or maybe they go after Howie Kendrick. Who knows? But I certainly think Jarrett Parker is going to be the most likely option for center next year. I think it'll be either Jarrett Parker or Austin Slater at this point. As Mac, I just don't know if Mac Williamson's going to be back with the Giants next year or if they look to trade him in the offseason. It'll be interesting. It's going to be a real interesting offseason. There's talk about Joe Panic being traded. I don't think he needs to be traded. His batting average was good this year, 288, and he can pull hit. I think he can definitely pull hit if they can get the right hitting coach in there. I think he's another one where the home runs can go up if they get the right hitting coach. The big question mark is going to be first base next year. Will Brandon Belt return or maybe call it quits with all the concussions he's suffered? So we'll see what happens with Brandon Belt here in the offseason and what circumstances dictate out of that. And it would have, this is what might have been season for Brandon Belt. Before he got hurt, he was on track to hit over 20 home runs, and just that concussion, what might have been really with Brandon Belt this year. I hope he can come back healthy next year in spring training, but we shall see what happens with that, and that's going to be an interesting one there, too. We'll see what happens with Brandon Belt, if he returns or not, or if they're going to have to look at, per se, go look at adding a free agent first baseman if some way, somehow, Belt decides to walk after this season. Then you got Kelby Tomlinson, who maybe he's a bridge at third next year if they do not go after somebody like Todd Frazier. I think Kelby's definitely going to be one that's going to come off the bench next year. I think they should avoid the Aaron Hills and Chris Marreros next year, those mistakes. And then you got Chris Shaw in the minors, who I think will be on the 40-man roster next year. We'll see how he does in spring training next year. He's definitely somebody to watch in spring training next year, so we'll see what happens with that. And then we'll see if Cueto returns to the Giants next year. I think Cueto's going to be back. You're going to have Bumgarner back next year. And we'll see. But next year, we might start talking about Bumgarner getting a contract extension. We'll see what happens with that. Or we'll see what happens with contract talks with Madison Bumgarner, as he's going to get a big payday here in the offseason. And then you've got Bumgarner. You got Samardzija. We'll see what that's another question mark. Will Samardzija be back with the Giants? There's possibility he might be dangled in winter meetings this year. It may look to add power to the lineup. We'll see what happens with that. I wouldn't totally be surprised if Samardzija's traded for hitting next year. You got Matt Moore, who will be back next year as probably the fifth starter. You got Chris Stratton, who I definitely think is going to be a 4 next year. So, and Moore was a bit inconsistent this year. Maybe he'll pitch better and avoid those bad games next year. And then you got 2 guys in the minors, Tyler Beede. I think if Beede can have a good year in spring training, we'll see if he can push the issue or not. You got Tyler Beede, who's probably going to start next year's seasoning in the minors after that injury he suffered. You got Andrew Suarez, who I definitely think will be on the 40-man roster next year. He certainly is a guy to take a look at. But I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the rotation, getting called up by midseason if Matt Moore struggles, and then you have 3 lefties in the pen with Moore, Block, and Smith. That's another one's going to be back next year. We'll see how the bullpen's going to look really great with Will Smith back next year if he can stay healthy. So that's certainly one. And then this is where we'll see what happens in the first part of next season. I think the first part of next season is definitely going to dictate what's going to happen in 2019. Another slow start from the Giants. If they start slow next season, we definitely start talking about a possible successor for Bochy, and I think that'll be Ron Wotus. And it wouldn't be a total surprise if Wotus is named the manager in waiting if the Giants do struggle out of the gate next season, and if the Giants decide they're going to have to sell. If they go into sell mode next season, I definitely see them go into it. It would be time for a roster teardown. And I think the roster might get torn down at that point, and you start looking at the future, and no longer a retool team, but an actual rebuild, which I think Bochy does not want to oversee a rebuild. And then at that point, you're definitely going to have to really start. Then Bochy could make the decision to walk after next season if things don't turn around next year. And it's not going to be easy next year either. The NL West itself is going to be a lot tougher next year. LA is still going to be a powerhouse, and then you got Arizona up and coming. We don't know if they'll take a step back next year. I certainly think Colorado is going to take a look at upgrading their pitching in the next season. San Diego is actually a really good young team. They actually overachieved by going 71-91 this year. So I certainly think San Diego is a team that if they get the right piece, if they get a good free agency here in the offseason, get a good offseason, they definitely could push to be a 500 team next year. So the West is getting better, so the Giants better tread water carefully here in the offseason, or it definitely could turn into a fire sale next year. And also some other news, we've had a couple other managers retiring or being fired. We're going to start off with the Philadelphia Phillies. And this one surprised me a little bit. Philadelphia Phillies have decided to fire Pete McKinnon, which I had him on the hot seat for a while. Then came September. Then Philly played a lot better here down the stretch. But now I guess they've made the decision to go with a proven manager next year and maybe get somebody to get into the thick skulls of Cabrera and Maikel Franco, who have underachieved this season. The pitching's looked better this year. And we shall see what happens to Philly next year. But if they can get the right manager in there, I certainly think they could start getting the wins up and start winning games, hopefully, in Philly. I think they were not supposed to be good, but they were not supposed to be in the cellar again either. And I certainly think probably they're going to go take a hard look at Ron Gardenhire. I think would be a good fit in Philadelphia, as maybe they look to be next year's Minnesota Twins, as the Giants want to be next year's Minnesota Twins, worst to first team. And who knows? Who knows what will happen, but I certainly think it'll be somebody like Ron Gardenhire. I think would be a good fit in Philadelphia to get them back to being relevant again. Another manager who stepped down after today was Terry Collins. I wish him a happy retirement. It's just this year has not worked out for him over there in New York with all the injuries and stuff. And I've heard Bob Guerin might be his successor, so we'll see what happens with that. I think New York could definitely bounce back next year. The pitching's going to be intact next year. You're going to have Jacob deGrom back. You're going to have Noah Syndergaard, deGrom and Syndergaard, so that they're going to be back. I certainly think Matt Harvey's going to be traded here during the winter meetings. I think Harvey's just not working out with the Mets at this point, and then probably fill out the rotation with Steven Matz. You got Steven Matz, who's good. You got Seth Lugo, who's a work in progress, and then probably Zach Wheeler to fill out your rotation. So the rotation is still going to be good over there in New York, and then the hitting's going to be a problem next year. They're going to have to go look at adding some bats. Maybe J.D. Martinez ends up with the Mets or something. But also the Mets are going to be shedding payroll this year too, so we'll see what happens. And that's going to hurt a lot of players in free agency this year, is that the theme of this year is likely going to be teams shedding payroll, not adding payroll. So that's certainly going to be a big factor there. But I certainly think if Alderson can have another good offseason for the Mets, they can get back to being relevant. You're going to have Brandon Nimmo next year in Philly, in New York. So that's pieces are there. Cabrera may or may not be back next year. So we'll see what happens with all that with New York. I wish them a lot of luck in their search for a new manager. And then Baltimore, I don't. St. Louis is a team I think that's not used to missing the postseason. They've missed the postseason the last 2 seasons. Now the question is, will Mike Matheny return next year? Maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't. I don't think he should. I think maybe a new voice might be needed. He's losing the dugout over there in St. Louis, and I think it would be a mistake to bring back Matheny next year. I think they'd benefit a lot better from a new voice in the dugout. But he does have the support of the ownership, so we'll see what happens with that situation in St. Louis. You've got Baltimore, who Duquette might be gone. Dan Duquette's not had a good year, and they're definitely going to have to do a retool. And it sounds like they're going to look at trying to do a retool instead of a rebuild, and we shall see. They need to definitely add some starting pitching in the offseason to compete. So I think Dan Duquette will certainly be, his seat's definitely warm. We'll see if he's fired or not. Buck Showalter's another one. We don't know if, I'm certainly not sold that Showalter's even a lock to come back next year. It might, if he's not fired this year, I definitely think he's going to be on the hot seat next year, and his leash is going to be certainly short. So we'll see what happens here. Maybe they go in the market for starting pitching. They might have to overpay for Yu Darvish. That might be the top commodity in free agency. They can go after Darvish. There's a couple other names out there, but we shall see what materializes here during free agency. And then you got Marco Estrada. That's another one that, but I think or maybe they go and, but they can't really go after a trade, but I think they're certainly going to have to overpay for starting pitching in free agency. So we'll see what happens with them. We got a lot of questions coming up here. All right, let's go around the league with other scores on this final day of baseball. And in a preview of the ALDS, the Astros beat the Red Sox 4-3. Your winning pitcher, Colin McHugh. Your losing pitcher, Fernando Abad. Yuli Gurriel, 2 for 3 for the Astros. Brock Holt, 2 for 3 for the Red Sox. Brandon Workman, 2 earned runs and 2/3 of an inning pitched. Fernando Abad, 2 earned runs and 1/3 of an inning pitched. I think McHugh is certainly one's going to be on the postseason rotation. And each team will play each other on Thursday in the ALDS. And that will start at, game 1 will be at Minute Maid Park in Houston. The Blue Jays beat the Yankees 2-1. Your winning pitcher, Danny Barnes. Your losing pitcher, Domingo Germán. The LA Dodgers beat the Colorado Rockies 6-3. Your winning pitcher, Kenta Maeda. Your losing pitcher, Kyle Freeland. Jock Peterson, 2 for 3. Corey Seager, 3 for 3. And Colorado has clinched the second wild card and will play Arizona on Tuesday at Chase Field. 2 earned runs and 3 innings pitched for Freeland. Jeff Hoffman, 3 earned runs and 1 2/3 innings pitched. And for the Dodgers, Brandon McCarthy, 3 earned runs and 2 innings pitched. And McCarthy will certainly be elsewhere in free agency next year, so we'll see where he lands. As this was McCarthy's last game as a Dodger. The Indians beat the White Sox 3-1. Your winning pitcher, Josh Tomlin. Your losing pitcher, Chris Volstad. Jose Ramirez, 2 for 2 for Cleveland. And Cleveland will face the winner of New York and Minnesota in Game 1 on Friday. And the Brewers beat the Cardinals 6-1. Your winning pitcher, Aaron Wilkerson. Your losing pitcher, Jack Flaherty. Jesus Aguilar, 2 for 3 for Milwaukee, as they just came short of making the postseason in Milwaukee this year. Sandy Alcantara, 2 for 2 earned runs and 1 inning pitched. And this is going to be a very interesting offseason for the St. Louis Cardinals as they take a look at hiring a new manager, and we'll see what happens with that. And we'll certainly see if Mike Matheny survives or not in St. Louis. And the Arizona Cardinals beat the Kansas City Chiefs 14-2. Your winning pitcher, Anthony Banda. Your losing pitcher, Jason Vargas. Ildermo Vargas, 3 for 4. Jeremy Hazelbaker, 2 for 3 for Arizona. Chris Herman, 2 for 2. Vargas, 6 earned runs and 4 innings pitched. Kevin McCarthy, 4 runs, 2 earned in 2/3 of an inning pitched. Mike Morin, 2 earned runs and 1 1/3 inning pitched. And now Arizona will host the Rockies on Tuesday. And the Royals go into a very tough offseason, as they're likely to lose Lorenzo Cain in free agency. You've got Mike Moustakas, who will not likely be back with the Royals next year, and then you got Eric Hosmer in free agency. So a lot of questions coming up in free agency for Kansas City as they head for another rebuild in the small market in Kansas City. The Reds beat the Cubs 3-1. Your winning pitcher, Deck McGuire. Your losing pitcher, John Lackey. And this might be Lackey's last start as a Cub, as he'll likely pitch out of the pen during the postseason. Javi Baez, 1 for 1. Rob Zastrinsky, 2 earned runs and 2 innings pitched for the Cubs. As now Chicago will face As the Chicago Cubs will likely face as the Cubs will go on the road to face Washington in D.C. for Game 1 of the NLDS. The A's beat the Rangers 5-2. Your winning pitcher, Daniel Mangden. Your losing pitcher, Cole Hamels. And Mangden had a good 7 scoreless innings out of Mangden, and he might be the new ace for the A's next season. Chris Hatcher, 2 earned runs in 1 inning pitched. Hamels, 3 earned runs in 3 innings pitched. Yohander Mendez, 2 earned runs in 4 2/3 innings pitched. Now we shall see. I think I like what the A's might have for next year. They can definitely look at shopping Jed Lowry in winter meetings, and certainly Matt Joyce. But I definitely think the A's could 75 wins. I certainly think if they get the right talent in there next year, they can be a 500 team. And the Phillies blank the Mets with both managers going to be gone after today, 11-0, as Pete McKinnon leaves a winner. Nick Pavetta, your winning pitcher. Your losing pitcher, Chris Flexen. Cesar Hernandez, 2 for 3 for Philly. And Maikel Franco, 24 home runs in the year. So we'll see what the new manager can do with Franco next year. Flexen, 6 runs, 5 earned in 1 inning pitched, 1 1/3 inning pitched. Rafael Montero, 5 earned runs in 2 2/3 innings pitched. The Angels beat the Mariners 6-2. Your winning pitcher, Parker Bridwell. Your losing pitcher, Shea Simmons. Ben Revere, 2 for 2 for the Angels. Daniel Vogelbach, 2 for 2. And I certainly think Artie Moreno is going to go after some starting pitching in free agency, as they now have the hitting to win. They just need to get some pitching. Shea Simmons, 4 earned runs in 2/3 of an innings pitched. James Pazos, 2 earned runs without recording an out. The Pirates beat the Nationals 11-8. Your winning pitcher, Angel Sanchez. Your losing pitcher, Gio Gonzalez. Adrian Sanchez, 2 for 3. Daniel Murphy, 2 for 3. Alejandro Diaz, 2 for 2. For Pittsburgh, Jacob Stallings, 3 for 4. And Stephen Brault, 4 earned runs in 2 innings pitched. Gio Gonzalez, 6 earned runs in 4 1/3 innings pitched. Tanner Rourke, 2 earned runs in 1 inning pitched. Oliver Perez, 3 earned runs in 2/3 of an inning pitched. And George Contos, former Giant, got his first save as a Pirate. Marlins beat the Braves 8-5. Your winning pitcher, Dan Winkler. Your losing pitcher, Junichi Tazawa. Arodys Vizcaíno, 14th save of the season. Definitely will be the closer for the Braves next year. Nick Markakis, 3 for 5 for Atlanta. Christian Yelich, 2 for 3. Max Fried, 4 runs, 2 earned, and 4 1/3 innings pitched. Junichi Tazawa, 3 earned runs in 2/3 of an inning pitched. And now Miami goes through new ownership here during the offseason, so we will see what what changes are made, and we'll see if. And I certainly think next year you're going to see Don Mattingly on the hot seat over there in Miami. The Rays blank the Orioles 6-0. Your winning pitcher Blake Snell. Your losing pitcher Kevin Gausman. Corey Dickerson 3 for 4 for the Rays. Brad Brock 5 earned runs in 1/3 of an inning pitched. And we shall see what changes are made with the Orioles next season. We'll see if Duquette and Showalter keep their jobs. And we shall see if Chris Archer is traded or not here during the winter meetings. Twins beat the Tigers 5-1. Your winning pitcher Bartolo Colon. Your losing pitcher Anibal Sanchez, both likely playing their final games with their respective teams. Brian Dozier 2 for 2 for the Twins. And Colon leaves a winner, leaves on top, so we'll see if he announces retirement or not after this game. As now Minnesota goes to the Bronx to face the Yankees with Irvin Santana likely starting. And around the NFL today, the Raiders fall to the Broncos 16-10. Derek Carr left the game with a back injury, and they were not able to run the football today, and they might want to take a look at signing Doug Martin if he is released from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here during the week, since Martin is coming off of suspension, and I think Tampa Bay wants to save money by cutting him. And the 49ers lose to the Cardinals in overtime 18-15. Brian Hoyer Brian Hoyer, 24 for 49, 54.3 passer rating. And 1 interception and 3 sacks. The defense kept them in the game, but I think with some of the mistakes that Brian Hoyer's making in the pocket, I think next week they definitely have to start taking a look at starting C.J. Beathard. I don't think the leash is going to be that long on Brian Hoyer next week if he starts. But at some point, you got to see if Beathard is going to be the face of the franchise, or if the Niners are going to have to draft a quarterback next year. That's, and Hoyer's already cost them 3 games because of his inability to score a fucking touchdown. But I certainly think that the Niners need to maybe make a QB change next week, and I'd rather lose with Beathard than Hoyer, honestly. So we shall see what happens with that. I just don't think that Beathard can be any worse than. I truly don't think Beathard can be any worse than Hoyer at this point, and see if Beathard's got something, or if not, draft a quarterback. That's how the situation is going to be next year. As in terms of just you can't stick with Hoyer too much longer. He's just too ineffective in the pocket at this point. And granted, he doesn't have a lot of good receiving core around him, but still, it's just time to maybe take a look at C.J. Beathard before the season ends and see where the Niners are going to be needing in the draft. All right, let's go to our standings. And the final standings of the season are up. Boston wins the AL East and will play Houston. Go to Houston for Game 1 later this week, with the Yankees hosting the wild card game against the Minnesota Twins on Wednesday. Cleveland wins the Central and the best record. Cleveland will play the winner between Boston and New York and Minnesota. Minnesota goes to New York. And Houston will play Boston Game 1 Thursday in the ALDS. Washington plays Game 1 in the NLDS on Thursday against Chicago at home. Chicago will head to Washington to defend their World Series crown. And the Dodgers get the winner of the Rockies and D-backs on Tuesday. Will go to LA on Friday. And now my picks for the wild card games. First wild card game we have. Look at the schedule. All right, on Tuesday we have the Yankees and the Twins. I think it's Severino it'll be Luis Severino against Irvin Santana. Okay, yes, it's Luis Severino against Irvin Santana in that game. I think the edge of the hitting goes to the Yankees. Pitching goes to the edge of the Yankees. Does Minnesota have a prayer? Maybe. Never know what October brings. But realistically, I'm certainly taking the Yankees. I think the Yankees will win the wild card on Tuesday. Next up, Arizona and Colorado. That will be Zach Greinke against John Gray on Wednesday night. pitching advantage Arizona, hitting advantage Colorado. That said, I usually favor pitching over hitting come the postseason. I think Greinke gets the job done for the D-backs, and I'm taking the D-backs to beat the Rockies. And I certainly don't like this one-game wild card that they have. I think it should be expanded to 3 games, not just one game. I think it's stupid having it a winner-take-all game. I think it should be 3 games. Best of 3 goes to the ALDS and NLDS. That's just how it should. I honestly think it should be. But it is what it is. My picks are Yankees and D-backs. Then I'll come back Thursday, Wednesday night after the D-backs, after the wild card game wraps up and the Sharks game, and I'll be back on air probably late Wednesday night after Teal Town USA wraps up. My friends at Teal Town USA, as the Sharks games are starting to back up, I like to listen in and watch my friends at Teal Town USA. They put on a good post-game show for after the Sharks games, and you got another one that's I think it's a pretty good place to, if you're a hockey nut, is Teal Tinted Glasses with Ian Reed. They're just both good people. AJ Strong and Eric Kura, just diehard Sharks fans. But after that wraps up, I'll probably come on air and do my picks for the NLDS and ALDS. So I hope you guys enjoyed the baseball season. I'm certainly not done. I'm not going on hiatus yet. I'll be around just less frequently now that baseball's winding down. All right, keep it orange, keep it black, keep it orange and black. Goodbye, everybody.